Something that I say along the way will touch you. I know it. Let's begin that process of crafting a meaningful life.
Here's Mary Crafts.
Welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. I'm Mary Crafts, and as always, just excited to be with you. I love the direction that we've been talking about lately. 2 times ago, I responded to a questionnaire on my social media that said you would love to know about resiliency and about how to be more resilient in your own personal lives with life's ups and downs. So I did a podcast on that portion of resiliency that I call relationship resiliency. And that comes from other people, from having relationships. And I love that piece of resiliency because it just leaves me with a warm, fuzzy feeling. I'm going to stand up again and I'm going to fight back again. And I live to be Mary Crafts another day because someone is depending on me, because I have a relationship with another person. Then last week we had Crystal and Miriam on, who are, in my opinion, the epitome of resilience. And their resiliency came from both places. And I'm going to talk about the second one today. First of all, their resiliency definitely came from having relationships and people who were depending on them, who were still living in Afghanistan, who were hoping that they were still fighting the cause, that they hadn't just arrived here in the United States and forgotten about them, and that they were living the life now, and so much for those poor women that we left behind. But we know that wasn't the case, and they're still fighting for them. But the second piece of their resiliency came from what I want to talk about today, and that is this kind of resiliency that comes from your own personal struggles. Definitely those two have been through the struggle, had lived a life like you and me, had gone to school, were working, could go out in public, no longer wearing the veil, that they were able to speak in public, and then that was all taken away from them. And the Taliban came in and created so many problems and struggles and challenges for them. And they could have just gone into that recluse place that, oh, poor me, I don't know how I'm ever going to get out of this. Or they could choose to be resilient. And I'm even more resilient and more of a badass because of all these trials and struggles. And that's the piece of resiliency that I want to talk about today. The resiliency that is born from our struggles, our fears, our mistakes, our trials, humiliation, discrimination. I've been humiliated many times in my life, and I could have simply curled up in a ball, rolled into a corner, and stayed there the rest of my life. But instead, I used all those things to fuel my desire to be resilient. And maybe you've not ever been discriminated against, but I'll tell you, discrimination is one of the most difficult things to come back and be resilient about. Because we find that oftentimes we're being discriminated against for things that seem out of our control. Like, for example, the person who's discriminated against because they're handicapped. That's out of their control for the most part. And yet they're discriminated. They're pushed over for a job or for an apartment or a place to live because of something that's out of their control. And when you can stand up from that kind of discrimination, you definitely build resiliency. I think about my own personal childhood. I didn't have what I would call an easy go. After school, for the grades of 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, every day there was a gang of boys waiting for me. And they would pick up the gravel in the driveway and throw rocks at me and chase me. And I just thought, I didn't understand why I was such a hated person. But whatever the reason was, it was unfair. And I could have just got into that unfair place and said, I could never save myself from this. until the day I picked up my own rocks and threw them back. Boy, were they surprised. It reminded me of I lived in a very small town in Iowa of 250 people. And there weren't any girls my exact age in town. Most of them lived out in the country on farms. But there were a group of boys that lived in town that were my ultimate nemesis. And one day they got their younger sisters to come to my house and to ask me to come out and to play. I loved it when people came and asked me to play. That didn't happen very often. And I loved it. And I ran outside to play with them. And their brothers were waiting in the bushes and jumped out and pummeled me with crab apples, splattering all over me. And I looked at those girls and realized that they had betrayed me. At that moment, I could have run back inside, hidden from life. But instead, that piece of Mary Crafts that I didn't really know about came out. I ran right up to every single one of those guys and just pummeled them on their backs and just really beat the living right out of them. And they weren't expecting that, but that I stood up and I gained resiliency that day. I did not have to be a victim. And in resiliency, I see that's kind of a big thing between either you're going to be a victim of things that are happening to you, or you're going to be accountable for them and you're going to make a difference. I hate to play and live in Victimville, where I am just at a loss to ever change my life. But the great news about leaving Victimville, and that if you actually are accountable for what happens in your life, the great news is what? You can change it. Yes, you can. You can become a survivor. You can become a fighter. And when you're a survivor and a fighter, that leads to being a thriver. And that's where I am in my life today. I channel those emotions of anger and humiliation and discrimination. And I challenge them to new goals, to not ever let anything defeat me. I remember as an overweight child and then an overweight teenager, I struggled to find my place. And I remember a Sadie Hawkins day when there was a boy and I, Bob Wilson, that was his name. And we had the most fun. We laughed and we were just best friends. We sat beside each other's in the classes. And when it came time for Sadie Hawkins Day, I so wanted to go with him. And I gave him the written invitation and the beautiful piece that I'd put together. And he turned me down. I didn't know why I was being discriminated against. Yes, I did. It was because I was fat. And nobody wanted to be around a fat girl. Like in high school, I hated the little armchairs we used to sit in where you had to slide in. And then there was the piece right here that you could put your books on your desk. I didn't ever fit in here. And so I had to kind of slide in sideways and just sit with one hip on my chair. There were just like so many things. I thought, this isn't fair that I get discriminated against. The chairs don't even fit me. That could have turned into a person that I hid in the corner and hid in the closet. But I channeled that into something different, into finding my own way. Now, not all of you may have experienced those kind of childhood discriminations. But being discriminated for your weight is one of the most difficult ones that I personally have encountered. I've also been discriminated against because of my sex, because I was a woman. And you can turn that into being a recluse and being angry. But I have found out that people who continually are put in that position, because they feel less than, they often play more than. Every single bully that I've ever met, and trust me, I met plenty of them who thought they could bully me. Every single one of them played the bully role. Why? Not because they felt better than, because truly inside they felt less than. And the only way they knew how to cope was to play better than. In the last few weeks, we have seen what happens to some people when they are discriminated against, when they are humiliated, when they take their mistakes and they are shamed for them. We had a tragic mass shooting in Texas. I heard somebody say on the news, on a news station I don't normally watch, that boy was evil. That boy was something that we don't want to have in our society. That boy was just someone who had been excluded so much anger built up. He was able to dehumanize all those victims that he shot. And we on the news were trying to dehumanize him, make him evil, and that he wasn't ever worth saving. He didn't have resiliency. He wasn't able to stand back up again and again. He'd stood up enough, and then he clicked inside. And when he let go of being resilient, he allowed his anger to become him. And he took it out on those children and those teachers. I don't want to ever see people as evil. I want to see people as overcoming their mistakes, overcoming their humiliations, their fears, their struggles, their challenges. And through that overcoming, you become resilient. Now, what if someone had helped him become resilient, had offered a hand, a different perspective in the way to see his life, that as a great gift of what he could overcome and who he could become? I've often played the judgment card myself. I'm not free from that, from where I've looked at someone and judged them. When I was an active Mormon member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I often found myself judging. That I would see someone and I would judge them because they maybe didn't have Mormon standards. They weren't wearing proper Mormon clothes. Maybe they had long, shaggy hair. Maybe they dressed provocative. Maybe they did something crazy like that. And I would judge them as being less than. And now, as I understand what oneness is about, if I judge them, I'm simply judging me. I had this lesson taught to me so well when I was still working and I was still CEO at Culinary Crafts. I saw a gentleman outside of my office come in and apply for event staff. Now, I wanted all of our event staff to be super clean cut, short hair, well shaven, just, prim and proper, because I thought that was how people like to be served their food. And this guy came in with long, shaggy hair, looked like he hadn't taken a shower for about a week. And I saw my son come out of his office and walk down and greet him. And I thought, well, surely he's not going to hire him. Afterwards, I said to my son, Ryan, did you hire that guy? And he goes, yeah, I did. I think he really wants to work here. I was like, he's not Culinary Crafts material. And he's like, I think we should give him a chance. Okay. The very first event this guy was assigned to was my event. And my event always were high-end people. He showed up, even though he'd been told what the grooming standards were, the same way he showed up for his interview. And I said, Alan, I think you were told you had to have short hair, you had to have clean-cut grooming standards. If you want to work today, you'll be working in the back, scraping plates. And he said, just shook his head and kind of looked down, and he knew. I was like, I wanted to say, grab his shoulders and shake him and say, just look at me when I'm talking to you. So he took his position in the back. And before he left that night, I said, Alan, if you come back, I expect to see your haircut. If not, I'm going to send you home because I only have so many positions in the back. The next time he worked, it was for one of my events again. He came in the same way. I'm like, what is with this guy? Does he not listen? Does he not know that I'm not going to work him out front? And when he came in, I said, Alan, you look the same way you came last time. I'm going to send you home tonight. If you want to work again, come different. They put him on the schedule again. He came back again. And this time, he did look different. He had looked around. He had made a change. He had proved himself to be resilient. And even though I might have humiliated in front of the rest of the crew and where I put him to work, even though I might have discriminated against him from his long hair, he took all of that and learned resiliency and stood back up. Just the other day, I saw Alan at work. It's now been about 4 years he's still working. One of our top people. He always comes looking great. He fought his way back and now presents himself as somebody who I am proud to have as a member of our team. He was resilient and is still resilient. It reminded me of another incident in my childhood with Michael Munchink. Michael Munchink was my nemesis. He didn't live in town, so he wasn't one of those boys that chased me after school. He lived on a farm. But every Sunday, he would come to church and come to Sunday school, and underneath the table would just kick me relentlessly. I would go home with these bruises all over my legs, skin marks, sometimes bleeding for where he kicked me. And I'm just like thinking, why are you kicking me? The only reason I could think that people would kick me was because I was fat. Well, is that fair? Is it fair you kick me because of that? This whole time, I'm 68 years old. That happened to me probably from the ages of 5 to 10. And I still remember him. I still remember being kicked. I still remember telling my mom, and my mom did nothing. And then I thought about it just this week when I was writing this. And I thought about, what if I process Michael through my lens of oneness that I have now? And how am I like Michael? And how was Michael really like me? I realized Michael's dad worked for my dad. My dad was, in that small little town, a business owner, one of the most respected business owners. And he had a lot of servicemen that worked for him that went out and serviced equipment that he had sold. Michael's dad was one of them. My dad would also oftentimes come home with a forlorn look on his face because Michael's dad just was always in his face. He was always hard to work with. He was always feeling put upon and a victim. He was always feeling less than and took it out on my dad. I thought about Michael, his son, and how he had grown up with that. Hearing about my dad and how his dad was a victim at work. I realized Michael was just taking out on me what he had heard his dad say about my dad. Suddenly my heart this week softened toward little Michael. I didn't see him that way anymore. I saw him as somebody trying to fight back, trying to make his way, trying to become resilient. I have no idea where he is now. My only hope is that he has become resilient, that he has learned, that he has not stayed a victim, that he has become accountable for who he is. Sometimes mistakes get blown so far out of proportion. I think of mistakes that I did in my life, and I still was wearing the badges, the spots all over my body of mistakes I had made. But mistakes are blown out of proportion when we live in a world where people are trying to be perfect. And as we all know, there's no such thing as perfection. So mistakes are simply part of our path, our roadway to get through life on this journey. We should treasure them rather than hate ourselves for having made mistakes. We are not perfect beings. It's why I always say, perfectionism will kill you. But seeking to be your very best every day will inspire you every single day of your life. That's how I want to live. I want to live inspired, to bring my very best. That's resiliency. And it forced me, those early childhood experiences, to become resilient. I had a choice, and so do you, even today. So, how do you build what I call this challenge resiliency? Resiliency that comes from making mistakes, from struggling, from being humiliated, from being discriminated against, from facing so many things in your life you don't know if you can get up one more time. How do you build from those struggles to the beautiful, brilliant, resilient person you can be? The first thing I think it's important to do, what I did with Michael Munchink this week, change your perspective. Change your perspective. Ask your mistakes and the mistakes of others. Do I know everything that there is to know here? Is there more that I can learn? What if I saw this from a different perspective? What if I saw this through little Michael's eyes? Would I see that differently? Rather than yelling at him and trying to get him in trouble, would I have instead been more loving and understanding to him? Change your perspective. Sometimes we go through life with these blinders on, and we only see what we want to see. And that's why we put blinders on horses, because we don't want them to see the big picture. They get scared if they can see everything. We put blinders on them so they can only see what's directly in front of them, and it keeps them moving forward. But that's not how I want to be. I want to take my blinders down. I want to see the whole picture. I want to see a different perspective. I want to know it all, and then choose my path on how I'm going to move forward. So start seeing the other person rather than judging them. Go out of your way to experience other people, other cultures, other foods. It's why I love to travel, because it leads to such insight into people. If I can see them, truly see them, and why they live a certain way, and change my perspective, it helps me be more resilient. When was the last time you had a disagreement with someone that didn't end well? My bet it's because you never saw their perspective. Because if you see their perspective and you can understand their thought process, then suddenly you can resolve things and you can be resilient and you can stay in a conversation until you come to resolution at the end. It's only when you don't see the big picture that you're unable to come to resolution through resiliency. The second thing that I think helps build this resiliency from struggles in your life is that when you feel this pain of discrimination or disrespect or regret, you can give in to that, or you can seek a positive way to transform that hurt into action. For example, I think about people who have become victims from these kinds of things, like the recent shooter in Texas. He became a victim of being discriminated against, of being disrespected. of being beaten down and shamed. But I have known people also who have been down that same road and chosen something different. For example, have you ever heard of Candy Lightner? Her daughter was killed in an automobile accident by a drunk driver. She could have seen herself and her daughter as a victim. She could have curled up in a ball and never seen the light of day again. But instead, she took that problem, that disrespect, that discrimination, and turned it into Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, MAD, and created a worldwide organization against drunk driving, and has made a huge difference in the legislation that we've passed within our states. She changed from being a victim into being a resilient woman. Have you ever heard of John Walsh? John Walsh's son, Adam, was kidnapped from a mall. And this was within my lifetime, and I remember it. He gained national publicity. That's when we all became so afraid of why we put harnesses on our children when we went shopping at the mall or at the Kmart or anywhere, or at Disneyland, because we were so afraid that someone was going to snatch them. He created a national center for missing and exploited children. He took his victim, his son, and he turned it into something resilient and helping other people who are in the same situation stand up again and to become resilient people. Mary Crafts, ever heard of her? She could have rolled into a ball and become a recluse, watching TV all day long, just getting bigger and bigger, just feeling worse about herself and worse about herself. But she took all those struggles, and I became something different. I became someone who first wanted to lift myself and then could lift others. I wanted to do podcasts and write books for women to help lift people up. I wanted to show people how you could release all those fears that all these years were holding you so tight by the jugular vein, and you could be unbounded and you could be free. I wanted to show people how you could truly let go of those fears and let go of the weight that was holding you bound. How you could become healthy. How you could become a fearless badass. What can you do because of the pain you've experienced? When you think about what pain you've experienced, how you've been discriminated against, what could cause you to be a victim in your life. Maybe it was your parents. Maybe it was where you were born. Maybe it was no money. Maybe it was no schooling. All sorts of different things could create that in your life, that feeling. And what are you going to do with that? Are you going to be a victim? Or are you going to create change? Are you going to learn how to stand up and teach others about standing up? So that brings me to number 3, is that you can reframe your struggles. And instead of seeing them as what has beaten you down, see you as what is standing you up. Yeah. Whether it be weight, maybe you were young diagnosed as ADHD. Maybe you were told constantly that you were not enough. Maybe you were shamed. Maybe you were ridiculed. I know your pain. Maybe you were abused. You can change those things into gifts and have them help you create a resilient person who is ready to stand up and take on life. Both shoulders forward, both shoulders ready to take on whatever comes next, because you've realized that you've reframed that now, and these things are your gifts that lift you even higher as you overcome them. Fear. Fear is one of those things that's with us probably from the day we're born till the day we die. Fear doesn't allow us to focus on what we did right. Fear only focuses on what we did wrong. And what do I want you to do? I want you to focus on all the things you've done right. But when we're caught up in fear, we only see what we've done wrong. And fear can be a fuel rather than a roadblock for you. You know, what happens in your psyche when you look fear in the eye and you do it anyway? Yeah. Sometimes you give in to fear and you run the other way, and sometimes you use it to propel you forward. When I was little, I used to let my fears just give in to me. I would cry. I would think I wasn't enough. I never could do it. I remember playing at the playground and getting to the top of the slide and froze. I couldn't slide down the slide, or I couldn't climb down the slide. My fear just froze me. My dad had to come to school and come up the slide and help me slide and help me get down. I was humiliated in front of all the playground. When I was young, I was taking swimming lessons, and our little town of 250 people with the kids were bused to Independence to take swimming lessons at their pool because we didn't have a pool where we lived. And so my entire busload would wait for everyone to finish their lessons and then get on the bus and come home. At the end of this challenge, everyone in the class was to go off the high dive. I didn't think I could do it. I moved myself continually to the back of the line and back of the line and back of the line and farther back until I was at the very end. By that time, everyone had gathered around waiting to get on the bus and were all watching. I went up the ladder. My teacher encouraged me and encouraged me. I got to the top of the high dive, looked around at everyone looking at me, looked down at the water, and just started crying uncontrollably. I knew I was going to fall off the high dive, probably land on the cement down there. I leaned down and I clutched the high dive, and I couldn't even move, everyone laughing and pointing at me. It inched my way back to safety, climbed down the ladder, and then I had to get on the bus with everyone who'd watched me fail, laughing and pointing at me. I could have not ever gone back, but I did. Later, in my 50s, when I learned to scuba dive and I had to actually swim, I learned to overcome that fear. I learned that for me, it was an accomplishment. For most people, it's an adventure to learn to scuba dive. For me, it was an accomplishment because I dug deep and took those fears and turned them into resiliency. It's how I felt when I went to Costa Rica. And all these fears about water, yeah, they're still with me. I have a pool in my backyard. I don't go out there and swim very often. Why? I'm just still afraid of water. But I do go out. I do get in because why? My grandchildren are in there encouraging me, and I want to be in there. So I've learned to look it in the eye and do it anyway. When I was in Costa Rica on this water slide, I didn't know what was coming. And if I had seen it, I probably would have ran the other way. But instead, they harnessed me up and I went down. It was a free fall, 100-foot free fall. I was so afraid I was going to fly off that slide. I just thought I'm going to close my eyes, and if I die, I die. If I make it to the bottom, I make it to the bottom. And when I landed in the pool, I knew I was safe, like, I'm alive. But each time you do that, you stand up stronger, more resilient. It's how I got to the top of Kilimanjaro. Every single one of the fears I'd ever had in my life, I faced on that mountain. I faced them. For the last time? No. But gave me more resiliency. And now, every time I do face them, I can say, I got you. I'm resilient. I can look you in the eye. I can overcome. And I can do this anyway. There are 6 big fears that plague us in our life, all stemming from one. We have the fear of failure. I just had a big failure. I've written my first book and I had a publisher that I wanted to publish it. I submitted a proposal to them and the manuscript, and they rejected it. And they said, "We don't think we're the best fit for you." I took that failure and internalized it as my book was worth nothing. For 6 months, I've sat on it. And then I thought, that fear of failure, that fear of being rejected, is keeping me from publishing my book. And by golly, I'm going to publish this book come hell or high water if I have to publish it myself. And now I'm on the road again. I am going to publish this book, and you're going to get to read it and buy it. I'm overcoming failure. We also had the fear of embarrassment. Oh my gosh, I've been embarrassed so many times in my life. But those people who are just embarrassed about their mistakes really aren't the people that are fun to be around. I realize the people who are fun to be around are those people who can laugh at themselves, who don't see themselves as needing to be perfect. I see those people who are vulnerable and can show themselves, who can show that they make mistakes. Don't you love to be around people like that? I love to be around people like that. And that has helped me overcome this fear of embarrassment. By being completely open and honest, I no longer have anything to be afraid of. We all have a fear of death and loss. Yeah. Death and loss is with us from the beginning. And I have come to understand that we fear death and loss less if we believe in something outside of ourselves. Not just that we are the beginning and we are the end, that there was something before us, that we were before, and that there's something after us, and that we will be after. That kind of belief in something other than yourself can build resilience. One of the greatest things, gives you a reason and hope to stand back up. We oftentimes have a fear of loneliness, but resilient people keep opening doors and keep making connections. They don't just sit and say, "I'm alone, so I'm lonely." I may be alone, but I'm rarely lonely. I keep opening doors, and that bouncing back brings more resilience, and I'm more ready to overcome loneliness. We have a fear of pain, both emotional pain and physical pain. And I can tell you this, that physical pain is way easier to overcome than emotional pain that eats at us day after day. But I know you've heard this phrase, no gain, no pain, no gain. I hear it a lot at the gym, no pain, no gain. And I don't always believe in that. I think you can be sore, but I don't know. Sometimes pain means maybe I'm pushing too much. But no pain, no gain can also help you build resiliency. I know that if I want my biceps to be stronger, that if I want my shoulders to be stronger, my ab muscles to be stronger, I have to work them. And when I work them, they become stronger. The same applies to your emotional muscles. The more you confront challenges, the more you face them, the more you ask for it to bring it on, the stronger those emotional muscles become, the stronger you are against pain. Now, all pain, all fears come from one place. Did you know that? All these fears I just talked about all come from one place. They come from the fear of not being enough. It was with us from the beginning, and it's probably going to be with us till we die. But it's whether or not you stand up again every day as a resilient person and know that you're responsible for how you react to those fears. You, just you. You make the difference in being resilient or not resilient. Fear is not necessarily the opposite of resilience, but fear is what can build resilience as you overcome it. Love kills fear. It is the opposite of fear. When I love myself enough, I can overcome any fear. When I love myself enough, truly love me, I am a resilient woman that can overcome anything. And that I carry inside of me all the time. Identify your fears. Identify those things that might be shortcomings for you in resiliency. And then create a strategy of how you're going to do it. Like, for example, if you have a fear of heights, maybe you shouldn't climb Kilimanjaro tomorrow. But maybe you should go to a building and go to the top of it and look out and just become comfortable with looking out the windows. And maybe you make a small hike up a hill and you go to the edge, not too close, look over, realize you've lived, you overcame it didn't give way underneath you, and the next time you walk a little closer to the edge. Maybe someday you'll sit on the edge and dangle your feet over and know that you are no longer afraid. Plan a strategy of how you are going to overcome. I overcame the fear of doing anything physical by doing a little bit at a time, one day at a time. I overcame my fear of hiking by taking just small hikes and doing little things. One of the biggest things that happened to me in realizing that I'd finally become a resilient woman was the day I jumped off the Maverick building downtown Salt Lake City. I was challenged to do this. It's what they called over the edge. And I'm like, yeah, I can certainly do that. I can go over the edge of this tall building. I'm all harnessed up. I can rappel on down. Yeah, I'm ready to overcome that. I can do that. I can do that for sure. And then the closer the day came, I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to, but I thought, you know what? I've done a lot of training with this, Mary. You can overcome this. And the morning that I arrived at the Maverick building, I got out of my car and I looked at it as the sun was coming up over the East Mountains and shining on it. And instead of seeing how tall it was, I began to cry. Not tears of sorrow or fear, but tears of joy, because I realized I was not afraid. I was going to go over the edge of that tall building. I was going to rappel down because I had overcome that piece of fear bit by bit by bit. When I went inside and took the elevator up to the top, by the time I got out of the elevator and the firemen were waiting there with their rappelling equipment, I was just full on bawling. And he's like, whoa, what's the matter here? Do you need to wait? And I go, no, I'm ready to go. Well, you don't look ready to go, Mary. And I'm like, I'm crying because I'm so happy. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm like Kevin in Home Alone. I'm not afraid. To overcome those fears is like the biggest piece of resiliency that I have inside of me. It's the peace I want for you. It's the peace that you can give to yourself. It's your gift to you to become a resilient person. It's part of crafting a meaningful life. We're going to talk more about resiliency in the weeks to come, but for now, resiliency through relationships, if you didn't listen to that, I'd like you to go back. Resiliency through overcoming your own struggles is a powerful piece that you can claim and begin to claim today as your own as we craft our meaningful life. See you next time.